The dusty trail stretched endlessly ahead as Henry guided his old horse toward Cedar Hollow. The sun beat down mercilessly on his weathered hat, and sweat dripped from his forehead despite the cool morning air. It had been 3 weeks since his last trip to town, and his supplies were running dangerously low. Henry was a man who preferred the quiet company of his cattle to the chatter of townspeople. At 42, he had grown comfortable with solitude on his ranch 15 miles outside town. His face bore the marks of countless days under the harsh sun, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow from years past. As he rode into Cedar Hollow, the familiar sounds of town life greeted him. Children played in the dusty streets while their mothers hung laundry on lines stretched between buildings. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady rhythm, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing in particular. Henry tied his horse to the post outside Miller's general store and stepped onto the wooden boardwalk. His boots made hollow sounds on the weathered planks as he pushed through the store's creaky door. A small bell announced his arrival. Old man Miller looked up from behind the counter, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Well, if it isn't Henry Watson? Haven't seen you in weeks, son." "Needed supplies," Henry replied simply, pulling out his carefully written list. He wasn't much for small talk, but Miller was decent enough. As Miller gathered flour, coffee, and other necessities, Henry heard voices from outside growing louder. Through the dusty window he could see a small crowd gathering near the back of the store. There was something in their tone that made his stomach tighten. "Serves her right," came a woman's sharp voice. "3 girls and not 1 boy. What good is a wife like that?" "Tom's better off without her," added another voice. "Maybe now he can find himself a proper woman," Henry frowned. He had never cared much for gossip, but something about the cruel satisfaction in their voices bothered him deeply. Miller noticed, his attention wandering, and shook his head sadly. "Terrible business, that," Miller said quietly, wrapping Henry's supplies in brown paper. "Tom Henderson threw out his wife yesterday. Beat her pretty bad, too, from what folks are saying." Henry's hand stilled on his purchases. "Beat her?" Said she was cursed. 3 daughters and no sons to carry on his name. Town's divided on it. But most folks think Tom had the right. Miller's voice dropped lower. "She's been out back since yesterday morning. No food, no water. Most people won't even look at her." Something cold settled in Henry's chest. He had seen plenty of hardship in his 42 years, but the idea of a woman being thrown away like broken furniture made his jaw clench. His own wife, Mary, had died trying to give birth to their first child 5 years ago. The memory still ached like a fresh wound. "Where exactly is she?" Henry asked. Miller gestured toward the back door. "Behind the store, near the old well." "But—" "Henry, I wouldn't get involved if I were you. Tom's got friends in this town, and interfering in a man's family business." Henry was already moving toward the back door before Miller finished his warning. He stepped outside into the narrow alley behind the store, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A woman sat crumpled against the stone wall of the well, her dress torn and stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Her long brown hair hung in tangled strands around her face, and she held her left arm close to her body as if it caused her pain. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and Henry saw fear flash across her face. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut, and there was a cut on her lower lip that had started to heal. She tried to shrink further against the wall, as if expecting another blow. Henry stopped several feet away, not wanting to frighten her more. He had never been good with words, especially around women, but something in her eyes reminded him of a wounded animal he had once found on his ranch. "Ma'am," he said softly, removing his hat, "I'm not here to hurt you." She stared at him with her good eye, saying nothing. Her breathing was shallow and quick, like someone ready to run at the first sign of danger. Henry looked around the alley and noticed there was no sign of food or water anywhere near her. The late afternoon sun would be setting soon, and the nights were getting cold. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. "Yesterday morning." The simple words hit Henry harder than he expected. He thought of his own warm house, his well-stocked pantry, his comfortable bed. This woman had spent over a day sitting in the dirt with nothing. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Beth," she replied after a long pause. "Beth Henderson. Though I suppose it's just Beth now," Henry nodded slowly. He had heard of Tom Henderson, a loud man who bragged about his plans to have a dozen sons. The irony that this woman had given him 3 healthy children, just not the ones he wanted, struck Henry as particularly cruel. "I'm Henry Watson. I have a ranch outside town." He paused, unsure how to continue. "You can't stay here." Beth's face crumpled slightly. "I have nowhere else to go. Tom took my girls to his sister's house. Saw I was bad luck, and he didn't want me cursing them too." The pain in her voice was raw and real. Henry found himself thinking of Mary, of how excited she had been about their baby, boy or girl. She would have been horrified by what had happened to Beth. Just then, voices approached from the front of the store. Henry recognized Tom Henderson's booming laugh among them. Beth heard it too and pressed herself harder against the wall, her whole body trembling. "Please," she whispered, "don't let him see me." Henry made a decision that surprised even him. He stepped closer and extended his hand to Beth. "You're coming with me." She stared at his outstretched hand as if it might be a trap. "Why would you?" "Help me? You don't even know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Henry replied simply. "And because everyone deserves a chance to start over." Beth hesitated for another moment, then slowly reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold and thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. Henry helped her to her feet, noticing how she favored her left side. "Can you walk to my wagon?" he asked. She nodded, though Henry could see each step caused her pain. He wanted to help support her, but didn't want to frighten her by moving too quickly. Instead, he walked slowly beside her, ready to catch her if she fell. As they made their way toward the front of the store, Henry could hear Tom Henderson's voice getting closer. He quickened his pace slightly, and Beth matched him despite her obvious discomfort. When they reached his wagon, Henry helped Beth climb onto the seat beside him. She winced as she settled into place but didn't complain. Henry retrieved his supplies from inside the store, ignoring Miller's concerned look and the curious stares of other customers. As he climbed onto the wagon seat, Tom Henderson rounded the corner with 2 other men. His face was red from drinking, and his eyes immediately found Beth sitting beside Henry. "What do you think you're doing, Watson?" Tom called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to getting his way. Henry picked up the reins and looked down at Tom calmly. "Taking a lady home where she belongs." The simple words carried more weight than any threat. Henry clicked his tongue, and his horse began moving forward, leaving Tom Henderson standing in the dust with his mouth hanging open. As they rode out of town, Beth sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For the first time in over a day, she felt something that might have been hope. The wagon rolled along the dusty trail as darkness began to settle over the land. Beth sat stiffly beside Henry, her body tense and ready to jump at the first sign of trouble. Every bump in the road made her wince, and Henry could see her gripping the edge of the wooden seat so tightly her knuckles had turned white. He wanted to say something to put her at ease, but words had never come easily to him. Instead, he kept his eyes on the path ahead and let his horse set a steady, comfortable pace. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the creaking of wagon wheels and the distant call of night birds. After what felt like hours, Beth finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Where are you taking me?" Henry glanced at her briefly before looking back at the road. "My ranch. It's about another hour from here." "And then what?" There was fear in her voice, the kind that came from having your trust broken too many times. Henry thought carefully before answering. He had acted on instinct back in town, but now he needed to figure out what came next. "Then you get some food and a safe place to sleep, that's all." Beth studied his profile in the fading light. She had learned to read men's faces over the years, to watch for the signs that meant trouble was coming. But this man seemed different. There was something steady about him, something that reminded her of her father before he died. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you helping me?" Henry was quiet for so long that Beth thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. I lost my wife 5 years ago. She died trying to give me a child. He paused, swallowing hard. If someone had thrown her away because she couldn't have babies, I would have wanted someone to help her. The simple honesty in his words hit Beth like a physical blow. She had spent so many years being told she was worthless, being blamed for things beyond her control, that kindness felt foreign and frightening. I'm sorry, she whispered, about your wife. Henry nodded but didn't say anything more. The wagon continued its steady journey through the growing darkness. As they traveled, Beth found herself studying the man beside her. He was tall and lean, with work-worn hands that handled the reins with gentle confidence. His face was weathered, but not unkind, and there was something peaceful about the way he sat. As if he belonged exactly where he was. She thought about her 3 daughters, probably crying themselves to sleep at their aunt's house, wondering why their mother had suddenly disappeared. The pain of being separated from them was worse than any beating Tom had ever given her. My girls, she said suddenly. Lucy is 8, and the twins, Rose and Clara, just turned 6. They don't understand why I'm gone. Henry felt the ache in her voice. Tell me about them. For the first time since he had found her, Beth's face softened. Lucy has my eyes, but her father's stubborn streak. She's always asking questions about everything. The twins are like night and day. Rose is quiet and gentle, always helping with chores. Clara is wild as a Mustang, always getting into trouble. A small smile crossed her bruised face. They're good girls? Smart and sweet and everything a mother could want? They're lucky to have you for a mother, Henry said quietly. Beth's smile faded. They had me for a mother. Tom made it clear. I'm never to see them again. Henry heard the finality in her voice, but something about it didn't sit right with him. He had seen enough of life to know that things that seemed permanent often weren't. But he kept that thought to himself. The moon had risen by the time they reached Henry's ranch. In the pale light, Beth could see a modest house with a wide front porch. Surrounded by well-maintained fences and outbuildings, everything looked solid and cared for, like it belonged to someone who took pride in his work. Henry brought the wagon to a stop near the front porch and climbed down. He walked around to Beth's side and offered his hand to help her down. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted his help. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground, and Henry steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. Easy? He said, You've been through a lot. Beth looked around at the ranch, taking in the neat garden beside the house and the comfortable-looking rocking chairs on the porch. It felt like a real home, the kind she had always dreamed of having. It's beautiful, she said softly. Henry felt an unexpected warmth at her words. He had built this place with Mary, and after she died, he had wondered if anyone would ever appreciate it again. Come on, he said, let's get you inside and get some food in you. The inside of the house was simple but comfortable. The main room had a stone fireplace with 2 worn armchairs facing it. A small kitchen occupied one corner, and Beth could see a hallway leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean and organized, but there was a loneliness to the space that made Beth's heart ache. She could see traces of a woman's touch in the curtains and the small decorative touches, but they looked untouched, as if they were shrines to someone who was no longer there. Henry lit a lamp and gestured for Beth to sit at the small kitchen table. I'll make some soup. It's not much, but it'll warm you up. Beth sat carefully, her whole body aching from the long day. She watched as Henry moved around the kitchen with surprising skill, lighting the stove and pulling ingredients from various cupboards. You cook? She asked, surprised. Henry glanced back at her. Had to learn after Mary died? Burned a lot of meals at first. As he worked, Beth found herself relaxing for the first time in days. There was something soothing about watching this quiet man prepare food, his movements careful and practiced. The kitchen began to fill with the warm smell of vegetables and broth. This is very kind of you, Beth said. But I should tell you, I don't have any money to pay you back. Henry turned from the stove. I'm not asking for money. Then what are you asking for? The question hung in the air between them. Henry had been asking himself the same thing since he had first seen her behind the store. What did he want from this arrangement? Nothing, he said finally. You needed help, and I could provide it, that's enough. Beth stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. In her experience, men always wanted something, whether it was cooking or cleaning or other things she tried not to think about. But Henry's expression was open and honest, with no hidden expectations lurking behind his eyes. When the soup was ready, Henry served it in a simple bowl and set it in front of her. The first spoonful was the best thing Beth had tasted in months. Warm and filling and made with care. This is wonderful, she said, and meant it. Henry sat across from her with his own bowl, eating quietly. After a few minutes, he spoke again. There's a small cabin about 100 yards from here. My hired hand used to live there before he moved on. It's got a bed, a small stove, everything you'd need. You're welcome to stay there as long as you want. Beth's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. You're offering me my own place? Just until you figure out what you want to do next. The kindness was almost too much to bear. Beth felt tears prick at her eyes, and she quickly looked down at her soup to hide them. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would you do this for a stranger? Henry was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Because everyone deserves a chance to heal. And because maybe we can help each other figure out what comes next. As Beth finished her soup, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The morning sun streamed through the small windows of the cabin as Beth slowly opened her eyes. For a moment she forgot where she was, and panic shot through her chest. Then the events of yesterday came flooding back, and she remembered the kind stranger who had brought her to safety. She sat up carefully, wincing as her bruised ribs protested the movement. The cabin was simple but clean, with a small bed, a wooden table, and a tiny stove in the corner. Henry had lit a fire for her the night before, and the ashes still glowed faintly in the morning light. Beth looked down at herself and realized she was still wearing the same torn and dirty dress from yesterday. The fabric was stained with dirt and dried blood, and she could smell the fear and desperation that clung to it like smoke. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. She had learned to be afraid of unexpected sounds, especially knocks that might mean Tom had come to drag her. Back, Beth, came Henry's voice through the door. I brought some things you might need. She wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders and opened the door. Henry stood on the small porch holding a bundle of clothes and a basin of water. His face was kind but careful, as if he understood how easily she might spook. I thought you might want to clean up, he said, setting the basin on the table inside. These were my wife's clothes? She was about your size. Beth looked at the neat pile of clothing he had brought. There was a simple blue dress, clean undergarments, and even a pair of worn but sturdy shoes. The thoughtfulness of it brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. This is too much. Henry shook his head. Mary would have wanted someone to use them. She never liked the idea of good things going to waste. After he left, Beth heated water on the small stove and washed herself as best she could. The warm water felt like a luxury after days of dirt and fear. When she put on Mary's dress, she was surprised by how well it fit. The blue fabric was soft and comfortable, and for the first time in months, she felt almost human again. She found Henry in the barn, feeding hay to a group of horses. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and something in his expression shifted when he saw her in the clean dress. You look better, he said simply, but there was warmth in his voice. Beth smoothed down the skirt of the dress, suddenly self-conscious. Your wife had good taste. Henry smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. She did. Always said clothes should be pretty but practical. They walked together toward the house, and Beth noticed how different everything looked in the daylight. The ranch was bigger than she had realized, with rolling pastures dotted with cattle and a vegetable garden that showed signs of careful tending. You run this whole place by yourself? She asked. Mostly. I hire help during branding season, but the rest of the time it's just me and the animals. Beth could hear the loneliness in his voice, even though he tried to hide it. She thought about her own isolation during the last years of her marriage, how Tom had slowly cut her off from friends and neighbors until she had no one to turn to. In the kitchen, Henry made breakfast while Beth sat at the table, still feeling strange about being waited on. She was used to being the one who cooked and cleaned and took care of everyone else's needs. "I should be helping," she said, starting to stand. "Sit," Henry said firmly but gently. "You're still healing." As they ate eggs and fresh bread, Beth found herself studying Henry's face. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, but also deeper marks that came from grief. She recognized that look because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. "Tell me about Mary," she said quietly. Henry's fork paused halfway to his mouth. For a moment, Beth thought she had overstepped, but then he began to speak. "We met at a church social when we were both 19. She was the prettiest girl there, but she chose to dance with me instead of all the other fellows." His voice grew soft with memory. "She loved this place as much as I did. Always had plans for making it better, making it more beautiful. She sounds wonderful. She was. Always saw the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." Henry looked directly at Beth. "She would have liked you." The simple statement hit Beth harder than she expected. It had been so long since anyone had said anything kind about her that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. After breakfast, Henry showed her around the ranch. They walked through the pastures where cattle grazed peacefully, past a small pond where ducks floated lazily in the morning sun. Everything was well maintained and clearly loved. "Mary planted these," Henry said, stopping beside a row of apple trees. "Said she wanted our children to have fresh fruit to pick." Beth could hear the pain in his voice when he mentioned children. She understood that particular ache, the dreams that died when life took an unexpected turn. "She must have been very excited about the baby," Beth said gently. Henry nodded, his jaw tight. "We both were. Spent months planning, picking out names, fixing up the nursery." He was quiet for a moment. "When she died, I thought about leaving this place. Everything reminded me of what we had lost. But you stayed. Couldn't bear the thought of strangers taking over what she had built, so I stayed and learned to live with the ghosts." They continued walking, and Beth noticed a small fenced area near the house that looked different from the rest of the property. Inside the fence were rows of vegetables and herbs, all growing wild and untended. "That was Mary's garden," Henry explained. "I tried to keep it up after she died, but I don't have her touch with growing things." Beth stopped at the fence, looking at the chaos of overgrown plants. She could see potential in the tangle of weeds and neglected vegetables. Her mother had taught her about gardening when she was young, and she had always found peace in working with growing things. "Would you mind if I tried to fix it up?" she asked. "I need something to do with my hands." Henry looked surprised. "You don't owe me any work, Beth. You're welcome here regardless." "I know," she said, "but I think it would help me as much as the garden." That afternoon, Beth began working in Mary's garden. She pulled weeds and watered struggling plants, losing herself in the simple rhythm of the work. Her body still ached from Tom's beating, but the pain felt different when she was doing something productive instead of just enduring it. Henry watched from a distance, surprised by how right she looked there among the plants. There was something peaceful about seeing life being tended instead of destroyed. As the days passed, Beth settled into a routine. She woke early and worked in the garden, then helped Henry with small tasks around the ranch. They ate meals together and talked about simple things like the weather and the animals. Neither of them mentioned the future or what would happen next. Beth found herself sleeping better than she had in years. The nightmares that had plagued her for months began to fade, replaced by dreams of growing things and quiet conversations by the fire. One evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, Henry broke their comfortable silence. "You seem different," he said, "stronger somehow." Beth considered his words. She did feel different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. "I think it's the first time in years that I haven't been afraid," she said finally. Henry nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Fear has a way of eating at you from the inside. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Beth realized that for the first time since her daughters had been taken away, she felt something that might have been hope. Maybe healing was possible after all? 3 weeks had passed since Beth arrived at the ranch, and the morning routine had become as natural as breathing. She woke before dawn, tended to Mary's garden, and then helped Henry with whatever tasks needed doing around the property. Today felt different, though, charged with a nervous energy that had been building for days. Beth was pulling weeds from around the tomato plants when she heard a commotion from the barn. One of Henry's best milk cows was making sounds of distress, and she could hear Henry's voice trying to calm the animal. She dropped her gardening tools and hurried toward the barn, her heart racing with concern. Inside, she found Henry kneeling beside the cow, his face creased with worry. The animal was lying on her side, breathing heavily and clearly in pain. "What's wrong with her?" Beth asked, moving closer despite her usual caution around large animals. "Don't." "No," Henry said, frustration clear in his voice. "Daisy's been acting strange for 2 days. Won't eat much, keeps lying down. I've seen this before, but I can't figure out what's causing it." Beth studied the cow's symptoms, memories stirring from her childhood. Her father had kept a few animals on their small farm, and she remembered watching the local veterinarian work when one of their horses had fallen ill. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the cow. Henry looked surprised, but nodded. "Be careful. She's unpredictable when she's hurting." Beth approached slowly, speaking in the same gentle tone she had once used with her daughters when they were frightened. "Easy, girl, let me take a look." She knelt beside the cow and carefully examined her, running her hands along the animal's sides and checking her eyes and mouth. The cow seemed to calm under her touch, as if sensing that Beth meant no harm. "Her stomach feels hard here," Beth said, pressing gently on the cow's left side. "And see how her eyes look dull? I think she might have eaten something that's blocking her digestion." Henry moved closer, watching as Beth continued her examination. "How do you know about this?" "My father raised a few animals when I was young. The local doctor treated people and animals both, and I used to watch him work." Beth paused, her hand still moving gently over the cow's belly. "He taught me that sick animals often show the same signs as sick people." She continued her careful examination, and suddenly her face brightened. "I think I know what this is. Has she been grazing in the far pasture lately?" "Every day this week," Henry confirmed. "Why? There might be wild cherry leaves there?" "When they wilt, they can poison cattle, makes them sick just like this." Beth looked up at Henry with growing confidence. "We need to get her up and moving, help her work the poison through her system." Henry stared at her in amazement. He had been ready to lose one of his best animals, and here was Beth diagnosing the problem with calm expertise. Together, they managed to get Daisy on her feet. Beth showed Henry how to encourage the cow to walk slowly around the barn, explaining that movement would help her digest whatever was causing the blockage. "We'll need to give her plenty of water and keep her walking for short periods," Beth said. "And we should check that pasture for wilted cherry branches." Sure enough, when they walked to the far pasture later that morning, they found several wild cherry branches that had been broken by a recent storm. The wilted leaves were exactly what Beth had suspected. "You probably saved her life," Henry said as they cleared away the dangerous foliage. "I would never have figured that out on my own." Beth felt a warm glow of pride that she hadn't experienced in years. Tom had always dismissed her ideas and made her feel stupid for trying to help. But Henry listened to her, trusted her judgment, and treated her opinions as valuable. Over the following days, Daisy improved steadily under Beth's care. Word of her success spread to neighboring ranches, and soon people were asking for her help with their own sick animals. First came Mrs. Patterson from the next ranch over, carrying a sick chicken that wouldn't eat. Beth examined the bird carefully and discovered a piece of wire caught in its throat. After gently removing it, the chicken recovered completely. Then came young Jimmy Cooper, whose family's horse had been limping for weeks. Beth watched the animal walk and noticed how it favored one particular hoof. She found a small stone wedged deep in the frog of the hoof, something the family had missed because they hadn't known where to look. "How did you learn to do all this?" Henry asked one evening as they sat on the porch after another successful day of animal doctoring. Beth was quiet for a moment, thinking about her childhood and the dreams she had once harbored. "When I was little, I wanted to be a doctor. My mother laughed and said girls couldn't be doctors, but my father used to let me help when the animals were sick. Said I had gentle hands and a good eye for details. What happened to that dream?" "Same thing that happens to most girls' dreams," Beth said with a rueful smile. "I got married young and was expected to focus on being a wife and mother. Not that I regret having my daughters," she added quickly. "They're the best thing I ever did." Henry could hear the pain in her voice when she mentioned her girls. He knew she missed them desperately, though she tried to hide it during the busy days. "Tell me about them," he said gently. "What are they like?" Beth's face softened the way it always did when she talked about her daughters. "Lucy, my oldest, she's got the same curiosity I had as a child. Always asking why about everything. She'd love helping with the animals." She paused, looking out at the darkening sky. "The twins are so different from each other. Rose is gentle and patient, like she was born to take care of things, but Clara, she's fearless. Always climbing trees and catching frogs and driving everyone. Crazy with her energy. They sound wonderful. They are. And they're growing up without their mother because their father decided I wasn't good enough." The bitterness in Beth's voice was sharp and fresh. "I wonder if they even remember me." Henry wanted to say something comforting, but he had learned that sometimes silence was better than empty words. Instead, he simply sat with her in the gathering darkness, letting her know she wasn't alone with her pain. The next morning brought another visitor, but this one made Beth's blood run cold. Through the kitchen window, she saw Tom's sister, Margaret. Riding up to the house, her face set in hard lines of disapproval, Beth quickly moved away from the window, her heart pounding. Margaret had never liked her, had always thought Tom could have done better for himself. Henry met Margaret at the front door, his expression polite but cool. Beth could hear their voices from the kitchen, though she couldn't make out the words. When Henry came back inside, his face was grim. "She wanted to see you," he said. "Had some things to say about your daughters?" Beth's hands trembled as she set down the dish she had been washing. "What about them? She says they're asking for you constantly. Crying at night, not eating properly. She's finding them difficult to manage." Hope and fear warred in Beth's chest. Her daughters needed her, but she also knew this could be a trap. "Did she say anything else?" Henry's expression softened. "She suggested that maybe it was time for Tom to reconsider his decision. The girls are making life difficult for everyone." For the first time in weeks, Beth allowed herself to imagine holding her daughters again. But she also knew that nothing about her situation had really changed. Tom still held all the power, and she was still the woman who had failed to give him sons. That evening, as she worked in the garden with unusual intensity, Beth tried to sort through her emotions. She had found peace and purpose here with Henry, but her heart belonged with her children. The question was whether she was strong enough now to fight for them, and whether Henry would stand beside her if she tried. The weeks following Margaret's visit brought an unexpected rhythm to life at the ranch. Word of Beth's skill with animals had spread throughout the county, and hardly a day passed without someone arriving with a sick horse, cow, or chicken. What surprised Beth most was how naturally the work came to her, as if she had been meant for this all along. On this particular morning, she was sitting on the front porch with Henry, sharing their usual cup of coffee before the day's work began. The early autumn air carried the scent of changing leaves and wood smoke from neighboring farms. Beth had grown to love these quiet moments when the world felt peaceful and full of possibility. "You know," Henry said, setting down his coffee cup, "I've been thinking about something." Beth looked at him curiously. Henry wasn't one to speak without careful thought, so when he had something on his mind, it was usually important. "The Coopers mentioned yesterday that Doc Williams in town is getting too old to handle all the animal calls." His hands shake too. "Much now to do delicate work." Henry paused, choosing his words carefully. They think there's room for someone else to take over that part of his practice. Beth felt her heart skip a beat. You mean they think I could actually do this as a real job? More than think it. They're practically begging for it. You've helped more animals in 2 months than Doc Williams has helped in the past year. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Beth had never imagined she could have a real profession, something that belonged to her and gave her independence. But she also knew how people talked, especially about women who stepped outside their expected roles. People wouldn't accept a woman doing that kind of work, she said, though part of her desperately wanted Henry to convince her otherwise. People want their animals healthy, Henry replied pragmatically. They don't care who provides the cure as long as it works. And you've already proven yourself to half the county. As if summoned by their conversation, a wagon appeared on the horizon, moving fast enough to kick up a cloud of dust. As it drew closer, Beth recognized old Mr. Franklin, who owned a large spread about 10 miles east. The wagon pulled up in front of the house, and Mr. Franklin climbed down with obvious urgency. Beth, thank goodness you're here. It's my prize bull, Thunder. He's down and won't get up. Been like that since yesterday morning? Beth was already reaching for the medical bag she had put together over the past weeks, filled with basic supplies and remedies she had learned to prepare. What were his symptoms before he went down? Stumbling around, shaking his head a lot? Thought, maybe he got kicked by one of the other bulls, but there's no obvious injury. As they rode toward Franklin's ranch, Beth found herself thinking not about the sick animal, but about the conversation she and Henry had been having. Could she really make a living doing this work? Could she build something that was truly her own? Franklin's bull was indeed in bad shape. The massive animal lay on his side in the pasture, breathing heavily and showing no interest in the food or water that had been placed nearby. A small crowd of Franklin's ranch hands stood around looking worried. Losing a prize bull would be a financial disaster for any rancher. Beth approached the animal slowly, her mind already working through the possibilities. She examined Thunder carefully, checking his eyes, feeling along his neck and shoulders, observing his breathing pattern. Something about the way he held his head made her think of a similar case her father's veterinarian had treated years ago. Has he been in any new pastures lately? She asked. Anywhere he might have eaten something unusual? Well, we moved him to the north pasture last week. There's some old mining up there from years back, but the grass is good. Beth felt a chill of understanding. Old mining operations sometimes left behind heavy metals in the soil. If he's been eating grass that absorbed those metals. She trailed off. Knowing this was a more serious problem than a simple stomach upset, working with Henry and Franklin's men, Beth managed to get Thunder on his feet. The bull was weak and unsteady, but she had brought along a mixture she had learned to prepare for metal poisoning in animals. It was a risk, but leaving him untreated would certainly mean death. Over the next several hours, Beth carefully administered treatment while explaining to Franklin what she believed had happened. Slowly, Thunder began to show signs of improvement. By evening, he was standing steadily and had even taken some water. I can't believe it, Franklin said, shaking his head in amazement. Doc Williams would have told me to put him down. You just saved me from losing everything. On the ride back to Henry's ranch, Beth felt a confidence she had never experienced before. She had diagnosed a complex problem, made a difficult decision, and saved an animal's life. More than that, she had done it all without needing anyone's permission or approval. You realize what this means, don't you? Henry said as their wagon rolled through the gathering darkness. What? Franklin's going to tell everyone in the county about this. You won't be able to keep up with all the requests for help. Beth considered this, and for the first time, the idea didn't frighten her. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. That evening, as they sat by the fire in Henry's living room, Beth found herself studying his face in the flickering light. Over the past months, she had watched this quiet, gentle man open his home and his life to her without asking for anything in return. She had seen his patience, his kindness, and his unwavering respect for her as a person. Henry, she said quietly, I need to ask you something. He looked up from the book he had been reading, giving her his full attention. If I did decide to start treating animals professionally, would that change things between us? Would you still want me here? Henry set down his book, his expression serious. Beth, this is your home for as long as you want it to be. What you do with your days, what work you choose, that's your decision to make. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'd be honored to support you however I can. The simple honesty of his words brought tears to Beth's eyes. She had spent so many years being told what she could and couldn't do, being made to feel that her thoughts and dreams didn't matter. Having someone believe in her abilities and respect her choices felt like a gift beyond measure. There's something else, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Beth held her breath, terrified that she had just ruined the best thing in her life. Henry was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I've been in love with you for weeks. Beth, I just didn't know if you could ever feel the same way about someone like me. Relief flooded through Beth like warm sunshine. She reached for his hand, and when their fingers intertwined, it felt like coming home in a way she had never experienced before. Someone like you, she repeated. You mean someone kind and patient and good? Someone who sees value in people others have thrown away? Henry squeezed her hand gently. I mean someone who's set in his ways, who lives alone on a ranch miles from town, who talks more to animals than people most days. Beth laughed, the sound light and free. That sounds perfect to me. As they sat together in the firelight, Beth realized that she wasn't just healing from her past anymore. She was building a future, one that included meaningful work, genuine love, and the possibility of happiness she had thought was lost forever. And for the first time since her daughters had been taken from her, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was strong enough to fight for everything she wanted. The morning started like any other at the ranch. Beth was tending to a neighbor's sick calf in the barn while Henry repaired a fence post that had been damaged in the previous night's storm. The autumn air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance and the rhythmic hammering of Henry's work. Beth had just finished giving the calf some medicine when she heard the thunder of approaching horses. Something about the sound made her stomach clench with worry. It was too fast, too urgent for a normal visit from neighbors needing help with their animals. She stepped out of the barn and saw 3 men riding hard toward the ranch house. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead rider's hulking figure and felt her blood turn to ice. Tom Henderson sat tall in his saddle, his face red with anger and determination. Behind him rode his brother Jake and another man Beth didn't recognize, but who looked just as mean and purposeful as the others. Henry had heard the horses too and was walking quickly from the fence line, his hammer still in his hand. When he saw Tom, his whole body tensed, and Beth could see him calculating distances and possibilities. The 3 men pulled their horses to a stop in front of the house, dust swirling around them like a small storm. Tom dismounted with deliberate slowness, his eyes fixed on Beth with a look that made her want to run and hide. Well, well, Tom said, his voice carrying across the yard. Look what we have here. My wife, playing house with another man? Beth felt her carefully rebuilt confidence crumble under his stare. For a moment, she was back to being the frightened woman who had cowered behind the general store, waiting for the next blow to fall. She's not your wife anymore, Tom, Henry said, moving to stand between Beth and the 3 men. You threw her away, remember? Made it real clear you didn't want her. Tom laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. That was before I found out what she's been up to. Playing doctor, making money off other people's animals? Margaret tells me folks are paying good coin for her services. The truth hit Beth like a physical blow. This wasn't about missing her or wanting her back. This was about money and control, the 2 things Tom valued most in the world. Funny thing about wives, Tom continued, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Even when you throw them out, they're still legally yours, which means any money they earn belongs to their husband. That's not how it works, Henry said firmly, though Beth could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The law regarding women's rights was murky at best, and everyone knew it. Jake Henderson climbed down from his horse, grinning in a way that made Beth's skin crawl. Seems to me like you've been harboring another man's property, Watson. That could be seen as theft. The third man, who Beth now realized must be some kind of local lawman based on the badge pinned to his vest, finally spoke. Tom here has filed a complaint. Says his wife ran off and you've been keeping her against her will. Against her will? Henry's voice rose with disbelief. She came here because she had nowhere else to go after he beat her and threw her out. That's just her word against mine, Tom said smoothly. And everyone knows women lie when they're trying to avoid their responsibilities. Beth found her voice, though it came out smaller than she wanted. I'm not lying. You beat me and told me never to come back. You said I was worthless because I couldn't give you sons. Tom's face darkened at her words. You are worthless. But you're still mine, and I've decided you can come back and take care of your daughters. Margaret's tired of dealing with them. The mention of her girls sent a spike of desperate hope through Beth's chest, but she forced herself to think clearly. And what happens after I take care of them? Do you plan to beat me again the next time you're angry? What happens is you remember your place and stop causing trouble, Tom snarled. You'll give up this foolishness about doctoring animals and focus on being a proper wife and mother. No, the word came out stronger than Beth had expected, surprising even herself. I won't go back to that life. Tom's hand moved closer to his gun. You don't get a choice, Beth. You're coming with me right now, or things are going to get very unpleasant for your friend here. Henry stepped forward, his grip tightening on the hammer in his hand. You'll have to go through me first. That can be arranged, Jake said with a nasty grin. The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut with a knife. Beth could see that Henry was outnumbered and outgunned, but he wasn't backing down. The thought of him getting hurt because of her was more than she could bear. Wait, she said, stepping forward. I want to see my daughters first. Before I agree to anything, I want to know they're safe and well cared for. Tom looked suspicious. Why? So you can fill their heads with lies about their father? So I can see for myself that they're healthy and happy, Beth replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. Any mother would want the same thing. The lawman cleared his throat. That seems reasonable, Tom. Man can't fault a mother for wanting to check on her children. Beth could see Tom wrestling with the request. He wanted to refuse, but even he could see how unreasonable it would make him look. Fine, he said finally. You can see them. But you're coming back to town with us right now, and you're not coming back here. I'll need to pack my things, Beth said, her mind racing. She needed time to think, to figure out how to handle this situation without getting Henry hurt. You've got 10 minutes, Tom said. And your boyfriend stays right here where we can see him. Beth hurried into the cabin, her hands shaking as she threw a few belongings into a bag. She could hear the men talking outside, their voices low and threatening. Through the window she could see Henry standing perfectly still, his eyes never leaving Tom and his companion's dot as she packed. Beth's mind worked frantically. She couldn't let Henry get hurt defending her, but she also couldn't go back to being Tom's property. There had to be another way. Some solution that would protect both Henry and her daughters. She found a piece of paper and quickly scribbled a note, then slipped it under her pillow where Henry would find it later. The note was simple but carried all the love and gratitude she felt for the man who had saved her life. When she emerged from the cabin, Tom was already mounted and waiting impatiently. Time's up, let's go. Beth looked at Henry, trying to communicate with her eyes everything she couldn't say out loud. He gave her a small nod, and she knew he understood that this wasn't over, that she would find a way to come back to him. This isn't finished, Tom, Henry said quietly as Beth climbed onto the spare horse they had brought for her. Tom's smile was cold and victorious. Yes, it is. Stay away from my wife, Watson, or next time I won't be so reasonable. As they rode away from the ranch, Beth turned back once to see Henry standing in the yard, still holding his hammer, watching them disappear into the distance. Her heart ached with the knowledge that she was leaving behind the first real happiness she had ever known, But she also felt a strength in herself that Tom couldn't take away. She had learned to stand up for herself, to value her own worth, and to fight for what mattered. And right now, what mattered most was seeing her daughters and finding a way to protect everyone she loved. The woman who had been thrown away behind the general store was gone forever. In her place was someone who knew her own power and wasn't afraid to use it. The ride back to town felt like the longest journey of Beth's life. Every step of the horse took her further from the peace she had found with Henry and closer to a future that terrified her. But underneath the fear, something else burned steady and bright: determination. She was not the same broken woman Tom had thrown away months ago. When they reached Margaret's house on the outskirts of Cedar Hollow, Beth's heart nearly stopped. There, playing in the small front yard, were her 3 daughters. Lucy had grown taller, her hair longer and more tangled than Beth remembered. The twins, Rose and Clara, looked thin and pale, their clothes dirty and ill-fitting. The moment Lucy saw her mother, she dropped the stick she had been playing with and ran toward the fence. "Mama, Mama, you came back!" Beth slid down from her horse and rushed to the fence, reaching through the wooden slats to touch her daughter's face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pulled all 3 girls as close as the fence would allow. "I missed you so much," she whispered, breathing in the familiar scent of their hair. "Are you all right? Are you eating enough?" "Aunt Margaret says we eat too much," Rose said quietly, her voice smaller than Beth remembered. "She says we're expensive and troublesome." "And she makes us work all day," Clara added, her usual fire dimmed but not completely extinguished. "She says if we don't earn our keep, she send us to the orphanage." Beth's blood boiled at hearing how her children had been treated, but she forced herself to stay calm. Getting angry now wouldn't help anyone. Tom dismounted and walked over to where Beth knelt by the fence. "See? They're fine. Now you can stop worrying and come home where you belong." "They don't look fine," Beth said, standing to face him. "They look hungry and scared. Children always look that way. Makes them more obedient." Tom's casual cruelty made Beth's hands clench into fists. Margaret appeared at the front door of the house, her face sour with disapproval. "About time you came back for them." "I can't manage 3 children and run my household too. They're your responsibility." "If they're my responsibility, then I should have a say in how they're raised," Beth said firmly. Tom laughed harshly. "You lost that right when you ran off to play house with Watson? You'll raise them how I tell you to, when I tell you to." Beth looked at her daughters through the fence, seeing the hope and fear warring in their eyes. They needed her, but she couldn't protect them if she went back to being Tom's victim. "I want to speak with Sheriff Coleman," she said suddenly. The lawman who had ridden with Tom stepped forward. "I'm Deputy Mills. Sheriff's out of town for the week." "Then I want to speak with Judge Harrison." "If Tom is claiming legal rights over me and the children, then this should be decided properly in court." Tom's face reddened with anger. "There's nothing to decide." "You're my wife, they're my children, and we're going home. End of discussion." "Actually," Deputy Mills said slowly, "she has a right to request a hearing, especially if there are questions about the children's welfare." Beth could see Tom struggling to control his temper. He had expected her to come quietly, to fall back into her old pattern of submission and fear. The fact that she was standing up to him in front of witnesses was clearly not part of his plan. "Fine," Tom snarled. "We'll let Judge Harrison sort this out, but until then, you're staying in town where I can keep an eye on you." "And the children stay with me," Beth said firmly. Margaret spoke up from her doorway. "Good, I'm tired of feeding them anyway." That evening, Beth found herself in the small boarding house with her 3 daughters, trying to explain where she had been and why she had left them. The girls curled up against her on the narrow bed, as if afraid she might disappear again. "Mama? Are you going to leave us again?" Rose asked in a whisper. "Never," Beth said, stroking her daughter's hair. "I will never leave you again if I can help it." "But Papa said you didn't want us anymore because we weren't boys," Lucy said, her voice breaking. Beth felt her heart shatter all over again. Oh, sweetheart, that's not true. I wanted you girls more than anything in the world. I was sent away because your father was angry, but it had nothing to do with you. Then why can't we go back to where you were? Clara asked. I don't want to live with Papa. He's mean, and he scares me. Beth held her daughters tighter, wishing she could promise them everything would be all right. But she had learned not to make promises she might not be able to keep. The next morning brought unexpected help from an unlikely source. Dr. Peterson, the town's physician, knocked on her door just after breakfast. Mrs. Henderson, he said, removing his hat. I heard you were back in town. I wonder if I might have a word with you. Beth invited him in, curious about what the respected doctor could want with her. I've been hearing remarkable things about your work with animals, Dr. Peterson sighed. Some of my patients have mentioned the cures you've provided for their livestock. Very impressive work. Thank you, Beth said cautiously, unsure where this conversation was leading. The thing is, I'm getting old and I've been looking for someone to help with the veterinary side of my practice. Someone with real skill and knowledge. He paused, studying her face. I'd like to offer you a formal position, with pay and official recognition. Beth's heart raced. A real job, with real money, could change everything. Dr. Peterson, that's very kind, but my husband doesn't approve of me working. But here's the interesting thing, Dr. Peterson said with a slight smile. I've been researching the legal aspects of this situation. If you were to work under my medical license, treating animals as part of my practice, that would make you an employee of mine, not an independent worker. It changes the legal standing considerably. Before Beth could ask what he meant, another knock came at the door. This time it was Henry, looking tired and worried, with Sheriff Coleman beside him. Beth, Henry said, relief flooding his face when he saw she was safe. I came as soon as I heard about the court hearing. Sheriff Coleman stepped forward, his expression serious. Mrs. Henderson, I understand there's been some dispute about your living situation and the welfare of your children. Yes, sir, Beth said, her heart pounding. Well, I've been talking to folks around the county about your recent activities. Seems you've built quite a reputation as an animal doctor. Saved a lot of valuable livestock. I've tried to help where I could, Beth said modestly. The thing is, Sheriff Coleman continued, several prominent ranchers have come forward to testify on your behalf. They're saying you provide an essential service to the community. Mr. Franklin is particularly vocal about how you saved his prize bull. Beth felt a spark of hope. What does that mean for the court hearing? It means you're not just fighting for your personal freedom, Henry said, stepping closer. You're fighting for the right to continue work that benefits the whole community. Dr. Peterson nodded approvingly. And as my employee, you'd have the protection of working under a licensed medical practice. That carries considerable weight with the law. Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. I've been asking around about your husband's treatment of you and the children. Several people have come forward with stories about his drinking and his temper. That could factor into the judge's decision about custody. For the first time since Tom had appeared at the ranch, Beth felt like she might actually have a chance. She looked at her daughters, who were listening to every word with wide eyes, and then at Henry, whose presence gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. When is the hearing? She asked. Tomorrow morning, Sheriff Coleman replied. Judge Harrison wants to settle this quickly. That night, as Beth tucked her daughters into bed, Lucy asked the question that had been weighing on all their minds. Mama, what happens if we don't win tomorrow? Beth looked at her brave, intelligent daughter and decided to tell her the truth. Then we'll keep fighting, sweetheart. Because sometimes the most important battles are the ones that seem impossible to win. Outside, she could hear Tom's voice at the local saloon, loud and angry, telling anyone who would listen about his ungrateful wife and his right to control his family. But inside the small boarding house room, surrounded by her daughters and knowing that good people were willing to stand up for her, Beth felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the power of hope backed by community support. The morning of the court hearing dawned gray and cloudy, matching the knot of anxiety in Beth's stomach. She had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and listening to her daughters breathe softly beside her. Whatever happened today would determine not just her future, but theirs as well. Judge Harrison's courtroom was packed with more people than Beth had expected. Word of the hearing had spread through the county, and it seemed like half the town had come to watch. She recognized many faces from her work with animals over the past months, and their presence gave her courage. Tom sat at one table with a lawyer he had hired from the next county over, looking confident and self-assured. He wore his best suit and had slicked back his hair, clearly trying to make a good impression. Across the room, Beth sat with Dr. Peterson, who had agreed to speak on her behalf, and a young lawyer named William Grant, who had offered his services after hearing about her situation. Judge Harrison was a stern-looking man in his 60s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had a reputation for fairness, but also for following the letter of the law, which didn't always favor women in situations like Beth's. This hearing, Judge Harrison began, is to determine the custody of 3 minor children and to address the question of Mrs. Henderson's legal obligations to her husband. Mr. Henderson, you may present your case first. Tom's lawyer stood up, smoothing down his coat. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of a wife who abandoned her family responsibilities. Mrs. Henderson left her children and her husband to pursue improper activities with another man. Mr. Henderson is simply asking for the return of his property and his children. Beth felt her jaw clench at being called property, but Mr. Grant had warned her to stay calm no matter what was said. The lawyer continued. While Mrs. Henderson has been playing at being a doctor, her children have suffered without proper maternal care. Her husband has had to rely on relatives to care for the children she abandoned. When it was time for Beth's side to present their case, Mr. Grant stood slowly, his young face serious but determined. Your Honor, what we have here is not an abandonment, but a rescue. Mrs. Henderson was beaten and thrown out of her home for the supposed crime of bearing daughters instead of sons. She was left to die behind a store and only survived because of the kindness of Mr. Watson. A murmur went through the courtroom at these words. Many people had heard rumors about what happened, but hearing it stated so plainly in court made it real in a way that couldn't be ignored. Furthermore, Mr. Grant continued, Mrs. Henderson has not been playing at anything. She has provided essential veterinary services to this community, saving countless animals and earning the respect and gratitude of her neighbors. Dr. Peterson was called to testify first. He spoke clearly about Beth's medical knowledge and skill, explaining how she had diagnoses problems that had stumped him and other experienced practitioners. In my 30 years of practice, Dr. Peterson said, I have rarely seen such natural talent combined with such dedication to learning. Mrs. Henderson is not just competent, she is exceptional. One by one, ranchers and farmers took the stand to speak about how Beth had helped them. Mr. Franklin told the story of his prize bull, which Beth had saved from certain death. Mrs. Cooper described how Beth had healed her daughter's beloved horse when everyone else had given up hope. Each testimony painted a picture of a woman who had found her calling and was making a real difference in her community. But Beth knew the most important testimony was yet to come. When Sheriff Coleman took the stand, the courtroom fell completely silent. Your Honor, the sheriff began, I've been investigating the claims made in this case. I've spoken to neighbors, shopkeepers, and anyone else who might have witnessed the Henderson family situation over the past few years. He paused, looking directly at Tom. What I found was a pattern of violence and intimidation. Mrs. Henderson was seen with bruises on multiple occasions. Neighbors reported hearing shouting and sounds of violence from the Henderson home. The children were often seen hungry and poorly clothed. Tom's face was getting redder by the minute, but his lawyer kept him in his seat. On the day Mrs. Henderson was allegedly abandoned, Sheriff Coleman continued, she was found beaten and left without food or water. Multiple witnesses can confirm that Mr. Henderson told people his wife was worthless and that he never wanted to see her again. The sheriff's testimony was devastating to Tom's case, but Beth knew the most crucial moment was still to come. Judge Harrison called for the children to be brought forward. Lucy, Rose, and Clara entered the courtroom holding hands, their faces pale but determined. Beth had prepared them as best she could, but seeing them standing there in front of all, these strangers made her heart ache. Judge Harrison spoke gently to the girls, asking them about their life with their aunt and their feelings about their parents. The answers were heartbreaking but clear. The children spoke of being hungry, of being called burdens, of missing their mother desperately. When Judge Harrison asked Lucy, the oldest, who she wanted to live with, her answer rang out clear and strong in the quiet courtroom. We want to live with Mama. She never hurt us, and she loves us just the way we are. The twins nodded vigorously, and Clara added, Papa scares us. He says mean things and makes Mama cry. Tom's liar tried to object, claiming the children had been coached, but Judge Harrison waved him silent. I've heard enough, the judge said firmly. This court finds that Mr. Henderson abandoned his wife and children through his own actions. Mrs. Henderson has demonstrated not only her fitness as a mother, but her value to this community through her professional work. Beth held her breath, afraid to hope. Therefore, Judge Harrison continued, I am granting Mrs. Henderson full custody of her 3 daughters. Furthermore, given the evidence of abuse and abandonment, I am dissolving this marriage and restoring Mrs. Henderson's legal independence. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Beth felt her knees go weak with relief as her daughters ran to her, throwing their arms around her waist. Through her tears, she saw Henry pushing through the crowd toward them, his face bright with joy. Tom's angry shouts were lost in the celebration around them. His lawyer was already leading him toward the door, probably advising him that any further outbursts would only make things worse for him. 3 months later, Beth stood in the garden behind her new house in town, watching her daughters play while Henry repaired the fence around their property. Dr. Peterson had helped her secure a small house near his practice, where she now worked as the county's first official veterinary assistant. The house was modest but perfect for their family. Lucy had her own small room where she could read and study, dreaming of becoming a teacher. The twins shared a larger room, which they had painted with flowers and birds. There was even a small guest room where Henry stayed when his work at the ranch allowed him to visit, but the best part was the large backyard where Beth had planted a new garden. Like the one at Henry's ranch, it was a place of growth and healing, but this one belonged entirely to her and her children. Mama, Rose called from where she was helping tend the vegetable plants, when will Henry be done with the fence? Soon, sweetheart, Beth replied. Smiling at the man who had saved her life in more ways than one, Henry looked up from his work and caught her eye, returning her smile with the warmth that had first drawn her to him. They had talked about marriage, but both agreed there was no rush. They had found something more valuable than legal bonds. They had found partnership, respect and love that grew stronger every day as the sun set over their small but perfect world. Beth reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had been thrown away like something broken and worthless, but she had discovered that sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of something better. Her daughters were safe, healthy, and free to be exactly who they were meant to be. She had work that challenged and fulfilled her, respect from her community, and love that lifted her up instead of tearing her down. Most importantly, she had learned her own worth, not as someone's wife or someone's property, but as Beth, a woman with skills and dreams and the courage to fight for what mattered most. And that was worth more than all the gold in the world.